Someone looks at you and asks a simple question, "How are you?" Without thinking, you smile and reply, "I'm fine." The conversation moves on. No one notices anything unusual. But deep inside, you know the truth. You're exhausted. Not because life has been especially cruel, but because you've spent so much time carrying everyone else's expectations that you've forgotten how to listen to your own needs. You've become so good at being there for others that somewhere along the way, you stopped being there for yourself. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a decision because it felt right for your heart, not because it kept someone else happy? Most people believe they're struggling because life is difficult. But Buddhist wisdom points to something far more subtle. Sometimes our deepest suffering isn't caused by what the world takes from us. It's caused by the quiet moments when we ignore our intuition, silence our feelings, and slowly abandon ourselves in exchange for acceptance, approval, or peace. The tragedy is that this doesn't happen all at once. It happens one small compromise at a time until one day you wake up feeling like a stranger in your own life. In this video, you'll discover 10 powerful Buddhist habits that can help you return to yourself, rebuild your inner peace, and become the safe place you've been searching for in everyone else. Habit 1. Stop ignoring your inner voice. Have you ever looked back at a painful decision and quietly admitted to yourself deep down, "I knew something wasn't right"? Maybe it was a relationship that slowly drained your peace, a friendship that left you feeling unseen, a job that looked perfect from the outside but made your heart feel heavy every morning. Before anything fell apart, there was usually a small, almost invisible feeling that tried to get your attention. It didn't arrive as a loud warning. It came as a gentle whisper, a moment of discomfort, a feeling you couldn't explain, a quiet sense that something wasn't aligned. But instead of listening, you convinced yourself you were overthinking. You ignored your boundaries because you didn't want to disappoint anyone. You explained away your discomfort, hoping time would somehow prove your intuition wrong. Most of us have done this at some point, not because we're foolish, but because we've been taught to trust everyone else's opinions before our own. We ask for advice, seek reassurance, and search for certainty outside ourselves, while the one voice that has been with us our entire life is the one we doubt the most. Interestingly, psychology tells us that intuition isn't magic or blind emotion. It's your brain recognizing patterns long before your conscious mind can explain them. It quietly gathers countless experiences, tiny observations, and subtle signals, then speaks through a feeling that simply says, "Pay attention." The problem is that we often silence that feeling because it doesn't come with perfect evidence. This is why Buddhist practice begins with awareness. Before you can change your life, you must learn to hear the quiet truths that already exist within you. A peaceful mind isn't created by collecting more opinions from the world. It's created by becoming still enough to hear your own. So today, ask yourself one honest question. How many times did your heart already know what your mind refused to accept? You may discover that your intuition has never been your enemy. It has been your most patient guide, waiting for the day you finally decide to trust it. But ignoring your inner voice isn't the only way we slowly abandon ourselves. There is another habit, even more common, that quietly steals our peace without us realizing it. Habit 2. Stop living for other people's approval. Have you ever noticed how a single opinion can change the way you feel about yourself? Someone praises your work and you feel confident for the rest of the day. Someone criticizes you, ignores your message, or seems disappointed in you, and suddenly you begin questioning your own worth. It's exhausting, isn't it? Not because people have opinions, but because we've quietly handed them the power to decide how we see ourselves. Many of us spend years trying to become the person everyone else wants. We say yes when we desperately want to say no, We avoid difficult conversations because we fear disappointing others. We constantly look for signs that we're accepted, appreciated, or admired. Without realizing it, our happiness becomes tied to something we can never fully control: the changing opinions of other people. Psychology helps explain why this happens. Every time we receive approval, whether it's a compliment, a kind message, or even a simple smile, our brain rewards us with a small burst of pleasure. Over time, we begin craving that feeling. We stop asking, "Is this right for me?" and start asking, "Will people approve of this?" The more we chase validation, the more our peace depends on something outside ourselves. Buddhist wisdom gently points us toward a different path. Real freedom begins when your sense of worth is no longer built on applause. The opinions around you will always change. Some people will understand you, while others never will. If your peace rises and falls with every compliment or criticism, you'll spend your entire life being carried by winds you cannot control. There is a quiet strength in accepting that not everyone has to approve of your choices. You can be kind without becoming a people pleaser. You can care about others without abandoning yourself, and you can walk your own path without needing everyone to applaud it. So ask yourself honestly, if no one praised you for the person you're becoming, would you still choose to become them? The answer to that question reveals whether you're living from self-respect or simply chasing approval. And once you stop seeking permission to be yourself, another hidden habit begins to reveal how easily we trade our peace for acceptance. Honor your boundaries before your breaking point. One of the quietest ways we abandon ourselves isn't through one big mistake. It's through 1,000 small moments when we say yes, while our heart is desperately trying to say no. Perhaps someone asked for another favor when you were already exhausted, and you agreed because you didn't want to seem selfish. Maybe you stayed late at work, even though your body was begging for rest. Perhaps you kept answering messages, solving other people's problems, and carrying responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. You told yourself it was kindness. You called it loyalty. But little by little, your own needs disappeared beneath everyone else's expectations. The strange thing about losing yourself is that it rarely happens all at once. It happens one compromise at a time, one extra obligation, one uncomfortable silence, one moment of ignoring your own limits. Eventually you wake up emotionally drained and wonder why life feels so heavy without realizing you've been carrying weight that was never yours to hold. Psychology has a name for this pattern. Chronic self-sacrifice gradually leads to emotional burnout. When we constantly ignore our own needs, the mind and body begin sending warning signs: irritability, exhaustion, resentment, and a feeling that even simple tasks require enormous effort. These aren't signs that you're weak. They're reminders that you've been giving from an empty cup for far too long. Buddhist wisdom offers a gentler perspective. True compassion is never meant to flow in only one direction. If your kindness is offered to everyone except yourself, it is incomplete. Protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of wisdom. Boundaries are not walls that push people away. They are quiet expressions of self-respect that allow love, generosity, and kindness to exist without destroying the person who gives them. So pause for a moment and ask yourself honestly, where in your life are you saying yes while your heart is quietly saying no? That single question may reveal why you've been feeling so tired. Because every time you ignore your own boundaries, you teach yourself that your peace matters less than everyone else's comfort. And once you begin protecting your peace instead of constantly sacrificing it, another invisible habit quietly comes into view, one that has been shaping your life without you even realizing it. Habit 4. Stop believing your worth must be earned. Have you ever felt like no matter how much you accomplish, it never feels like enough? You work harder, hoping the next achievement will finally bring peace. You set higher standards, believing perfection will silence your self-doubt. You keep proving yourself at work, in relationships, and even to complete strangers. Yet the feeling never lasts. For a brief moment, you're proud of yourself. Then almost immediately, your mind moves the finish line a little further away. So you begin chasing it again. Many people spend their entire lives trapped in this invisible race. They believe their value depends on how productive they are, how successful they become, or how useful they can be to everyone around them. They quietly tell themselves, when I achieve more, then I'll finally feel worthy. When I'm perfect, then I'll finally deserve love. But that day never arrives, because the problem was never a lack of achievement. It was the belief that your worth had to be earned in the first place. Psychology shows that when our self-worth becomes conditional, anxiety naturally follows. If your value depends on performance, then every mistake feels like a personal failure. Every criticism becomes proof that you're not enough. Every comparison convinces you that someone else deserves happiness more than you do. Instead of living your life, you spend it constantly trying to qualify for it. Buddhist wisdom gently reminds us of something we've forgotten. A flower doesn't bloom to prove that it deserves sunlight. It blooms because blooming is its nature. In the same way, your existence does not require constant justification. You don't need permission to be worthy. You don't need endless accomplishments to deserve peace. You already possess the value you've been trying so hard to earn. So pause and ask yourself, if you stopped proving yourself to the world tomorrow, would you still believe you were enough? That question can change an entire life, because the moment you stop measuring your worth by what you do, you finally begin discovering you truly are. And the most surprising part is this: abandoning yourself isn't always loud. Sometimes it happens so quietly that you don't even notice it, until you've drifted far away from the person you were always meant to be. Habit 5. Stop filling every quiet moment with noise. Have you ever noticed what happens the moment life becomes quiet? You're waiting in line for a few minutes, and without thinking, you reach for your phone. You finish dinner, and the television immediately turns on. You're driving somewhere alone, so music or a podcast fills every second of the journey. Before going to sleep, you scroll through endless videos until your eyes grow tired enough to close. It all feels normal. But have you ever asked yourself why silence has become so uncomfortable? Many of us believe we're simply passing the time. In reality, we're often running from the one conversation we've been avoiding, the conversation with ourselves. The constant stream of notifications, videos, music, and entertainment keeps the mind occupied, but it also keeps deeper emotions hidden beneath the surface. As long as there's another screen to watch or another distraction to chase, we never have to sit with the questions we've been afraid to ask. Psychology tells us that distraction can temporarily reduce emotional discomfort. It gives the brain something else to focus on, creating a brief sense of relief. But relief is not the same as healing. The emotions we avoid don't disappear. They simply wait for the next quiet moment, growing heavier each time we refuse to acknowledge them. This is why stillness has always held such an important place in Buddhist practice. Silence is not an empty space that needs to be filled. It is the place where we finally begin hearing the truths that have been drowned out by constant noise. When the world becomes quiet, your heart starts speaking. It tells you what you've been neglecting, what you've been carrying, and what you've been longing for all along. At first, those moments may feel uncomfortable. You may discover sadness, fear, or uncertainty. But if you remain present, instead of reaching for another distraction, something remarkable begins to happen. The same silence that once felt lonely slowly becomes peaceful. It transforms from something you escaped into something you protect, because the person you've been searching for beneath all the noise has been there all along, patiently waiting for you to listen. And once you stop escaping yourself through constant distraction, another quiet habit begins to reshape your life in ways you never expected. Habit 6. Forgive the version of you that didn't know better. If there is one person many of us struggle to forgive, it isn't someone from our past. It's ourselves. Years can pass, yet we still replay old decisions, as though we're standing in a courtroom where we are both the judge and the accused. We remember the relationship we stayed in too long, the opportunity we were too afraid to take, the words we wish we had never spoken, or the warning signs we chose to ignore. The event itself is over, but inside our minds, the punishment continues. We quietly tell ourselves, I should have known better. I can't believe I let that happen. If only I had made a different choice. Without realizing it, we begin measuring who we are today by the mistakes of someone we used to be. But here's a question worth asking. How could the person you were yesterday have possessed the wisdom that only today's experiences have given you? Psychology offers a compassionate answer. People who practice self-compassion recover from failure more effectively than those who constantly criticize themselves. They don't ignore their mistakes or pretend they never happened. Instead, they acknowledge them, learn from them, and continue moving forward. Self-punishment may feel like responsibility, but in reality, it keeps us emotionally trapped in a version of ourselves that no longer exists. This is beautifully reflected in Buddhist wisdom. Every sunrise is a reminder that life is constantly beginning again. The present moment never asks who you were 5 years ago. It only asks who you choose to become today. The person who made those mistakes was doing the best they could with the awareness they had at the time. They were learning lessons that could only be understood by living through them. Perhaps it's time to stop demanding perfection from a version of yourself who was simply trying to find the way. Forgive the person who trusted too easily. Forgive the person who stayed too long. Forgive the person who didn't yet know what peace truly required, because that version of you was never your enemy. They were the bridge that carried you to the wisdom you have today. And when you finally stop fighting your past, something extraordinary begins to happen. The guilt that once weighed down your heart slowly turns into gratitude, not because you're grateful for the pain itself, but because it shaped a person who now sees life with greater clarity, deeper compassion, and quieter strength. As guilt begins to soften, you don't become someone new. You simply become free enough to be the person you were always capable of becoming. Habit 7. Choose peace over being right. Have you ever replayed an argument in your mind long after it was over? You think of the perfect response you should have given. You imagine proving your point more clearly. You wish they would finally understand your side of the story. Days pass, sometimes even years, yet the conversation continues inside your head as if it never truly ended. The strange part is that even if you could somehow win that argument today, would it really give you the peace you've been searching for? Many of us unknowingly spend our lives trying to be understood by people who have already decided not to listen. We defend ourselves over and over, hoping that if we explain our intentions one more time, they'll finally see us differently. We hold on to old grudges because we believe letting go means admitting defeat. But while we're busy protecting our pride, our peace quietly slips away. Psychology shows that unresolved conflict keeps the body's stress response activated. Every time we replay an old disagreement, our mind reacts as though the threat is happening again. The heart beats a little faster. The body grows tense. Emotions that should have faded months ago remain alive because we continue feeding them with our attention. We think we're holding on to the argument, but in reality, the argument is holding on to us. This is why Buddhist wisdom makes a quiet distinction between the ego and awareness. The ego wants the last word. It wants recognition, validation, and the satisfaction of being declared right. Wisdom asks a different question altogether. Is this worth losing my peace over? That question changes everything, because there are moments when walking away is not weakness. Remaining silent is not surrender. Choosing not to prove yourself is not failure. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who no longer feels the need to win every battle. There is an incredible freedom in realizing that your peace does not depend on everyone agreeing with you. Some people will misunderstand your intentions. Some will judge you through the lens of their own experiences. Others may never see the truth, no matter how clearly you explain it. And that's okay. Not every misunderstanding is yours to fix. When you stop carrying the burden of proving yourself, your heart becomes lighter. You begin placing your energy where it truly belongs, into your own growth instead of endless conflict. And as the need to be right slowly fades, you begin to notice something that has been quietly missing for a long time: a deeper relationship with yourself. Habit 8. Make time for the person you're becoming. There is a question we rarely stop to ask ourselves. Not who am I today, but who am I becoming? The difference matters more than most people realize. Every choice you make, every habit you repeat, and every hour you spend is quietly shaping the person you will be a year from now. Yet many of us are so busy reacting to life's demands that we never create space to grow intentionally. We fill our calendars with responsibilities, but leave no room for our own becoming. Think about how easily we schedule meetings, appointments, and commitments for other people. We protect those hours because they feel important. But when it comes to reading a few pages of a meaningful book, taking a peaceful walk, sitting in meditation, or simply reflecting on the direction of our lives, those moments are often the first to disappear. We tell ourselves we will make time later without realizing that later has a way of becoming never. Psychology suggests that identity is not built through one life-changing decision. It is shaped by small actions repeated consistently over time. The habits you practice today become the beliefs you carry tomorrow. If you spend even a little time each day learning, reflecting, and caring for your inner world, you are not only changing your routine, you are quietly changing who you become. This is why Buddhist practice has always valued simple and consistent discipline over dramatic transformation. A mountain is not shaped by one drop of rain, but by countless drops falling over time. In the same way, lasting change rarely arrives with applause or sudden breakthroughs. It unfolds quietly, almost invisibly, through the choices no one else sees. Perhaps the most important appointment you will ever make is the one you keep with yourself. A morning walk that clears your mind. 10 minutes of meditation before the world begins demanding your attention. A few pages that expand your perspective. A moment of honest reflection before the day comes to an end. These small acts may seem insignificant, but together they become the foundation of a completely different life. Remember, you are not only living your days, you are creating the person who will live your future. And once you begin investing in the person you are becoming, one final habit transforms the way you see yourself forever. Habit 9. Speak to yourself like someone you love. There is one conversation that never truly stops. It begins the moment you wake up and follows you through every success, every mistake, every disappointment, and every quiet moment in between. It is the conversation you have with yourself. The surprising thing is that most of us never question the tone of that voice. We simply accept it. When something goes wrong, it whispers, "You should have done better." When we compare ourselves to others, it says, "You are falling behind." When we make a mistake, it quickly concludes, "You are not good enough." Over time, those thoughts become so familiar that we mistake them for truth. But they are not the truth, they are habits. And like every habit, they can be changed. Psychologists have found that the way we speak to ourselves has a powerful impact on our emotional well-being. Harsh self-talk does not motivate us nearly as much as we believe it does. Instead, it increases stress, fuels anxiety, and slowly weakens our confidence. The mind begins believing the words it hears most often, especially when those words come from within. Eventually, your inner voice becomes the emotional home you carry everywhere you go. That is why Buddhist practice places such importance on compassion, not only toward others, but toward yourself. True strength is not measured by how harshly you judge your imperfections. It is measured by how gently you guide yourself through them. A compassionate mind does not ignore mistakes. It simply refuses to turn every mistake into a reason for self-hatred. Imagine a close friend came to you carrying the same fears, regrets, and insecurities that you carry every day. Would you tell them they were a failure? Would you remind them of every mistake they have ever made? Or would you encourage them with patience, kindness, and hope? Then why should you deserve anything less? Perhaps the voice you have been listening to for years was never meant to be your greatest critic. Perhaps it was always meant to become your greatest source of encouragement. So pause for a moment and ask yourself honestly, would you speak to someone you love the way you speak to yourself? If the answer is no, then today is the perfect day to begin changing that conversation. Because the relationship you have with yourself becomes the foundation for every other relationship in your life. And finally, everything you have practiced throughout this journey leads to one last habit, the habit that quietly brings all the others together and changes the way you see yourself forever. Habit 10. Come home to the person you never truly lost. For most of our lives, we are taught to search for success, search for love, search for acceptance, search for the life that will finally make us feel complete. We keep believing that somewhere beyond the next achievement, the next relationship, or the next opportunity, there is a version of ourselves who will finally feel enough. So we spend years looking outward, convinced that the missing piece is waiting somewhere outside of us. But what if we have been searching in the wrong direction all along? Perhaps the person you have been trying so hard to find was never missing. Perhaps they were simply waiting beneath years of fear, people-pleasing, self-doubt, and forgotten dreams. Think back to everything we have explored together in this journey. Every time you ignored your intuition, searched for someone else's approval, abandoned your boundaries, chased perfection, escaped into endless distractions, punished yourself for the past, fought battles that stole your peace, neglected your own growth, or spoke to yourself without kindness, you were not losing who you were. You were simply moving further away from yourself. That realization changes everything. Because if you were never truly lost, then you do not need to become someone completely different. You simply need to return. This is one of the quietest, yet most powerful insights in Buddhist wisdom. Enlightenment is not about creating a brand new self. It is about seeing clearly through the layers of fear, attachment, and illusion that have covered your true nature for so long. Beneath all those layers, there has always been a peaceful, compassionate, and deeply worthy person patiently waiting for you to come home. And coming home does not happen in one dramatic moment. It happens every time you choose honesty over pretending, every time you respect your own boundaries, every time you forgive yourself instead of reliving yesterday, every time you choose peace instead of proving a point, every time you sit quietly long enough to hear your own heart again. These small choices may seem ordinary, but together they become a completely different way of living. Slowly, you begin to notice something changing. You become calmer because you no longer need everyone to understand you. You become more honest because you are no longer hiding from yourself. You become more patient because you stop expecting healing to happen overnight. You become more peaceful because your happiness is no longer tied to things that constantly change. The world around you may still be unpredictable. People will still come and go. Life will continue bringing both joy and sorrow. But your relationship with yourself becomes steady. And when that happens, no disappointment can take away what you have built within. This is what real transformation looks like. It is not loud. It does not need applause. It does not announce itself to the world. It quietly changes the way you wake up each morning, the way you respond to life's challenges, and the way you treat the person staring back at you in the mirror. One day, without even realizing when it happened, you will stop searching for the home you have been chasing your entire life, because you will finally understand something that has always been true. You were never broken. You were never missing. You had simply forgotten the way back to yourself, and the moment you remember that path is the moment your real life begins. Before you leave this video, I want you to return to the moment where this journey began. At the beginning, someone asked a simple question. How are you? And maybe, just like so many times before, you smiled and answered, I'm fine. It was an easy answer, a familiar answer, one that asked nothing from you except to keep moving forward. But maybe, after everything we have explored together, that answer is not the most important one anymore. The question that truly matters is the one you ask yourself when no one else is around. When the room becomes quiet, when your phone is finally out of your hands, and when there is no one left to impress or satisfy, can you gently ask yourself, how am I really? Not to judge yourself, not to criticize yourself, but to honestly listen. Because that simple moment of honesty is often where healing begins. Throughout this video, we have discovered that abandoning yourself rarely happens through one dramatic decision. It happens in small moments, when you ignore your intuition, seek approval instead of peace, silence your own needs, carry guilt that no longer belongs to you, or speak to yourself with a harshness you would never offer another human being. And if those small moments can slowly pull you away from yourself, then small moments of awareness can gently lead you back home. The beautiful truth is that rebuilding your life does not require becoming a completely different person. It does not begin when your circumstances finally improve, or when someone else starts treating you differently. It begins the moment you stop walking away from your own heart. It begins when you choose to trust yourself, respect yourself, and care for yourself with the same compassion you have so freely given to everyone else. You may still face difficult days. People will still misunderstand you. Life will continue to change in ways you cannot control. But when your relationship with yourself becomes strong, those storms no longer have the power to define who you are. Instead of constantly searching for peace somewhere outside yourself, you begin carrying it wherever you go. So as this journey comes to an end, do not worry about remembering every habit we discussed today. Remember the deeper message that connects them all. Never become a stranger to yourself again, because no matter how many times you have lost your way, you can always choose a different direction. You can always return to the person who has been patiently waiting beneath the expectations, the fears, and the endless noise. And I will leave you with one final question to carry with you long after this video ends. If you stopped abandoning yourself today, what kind of life would finally become possible?